Everyone. This is update for June 24, 2022, day 121 of the war, end of the date update. So it's a fourth month anniversary of this war. It's sad to say, but this war has been going on for 4 months at this point. We sort of uh, moving to the fifth month of this war, unfortunately. So now let's actually talk about the high level general strategic stuff, and then we'll do walks through the front line as we always do. So first of all, for those who are regular viewers, you remember that we mentioned about the potential default on Russian sovereign debt. We discussed that about end of May. So the grace period is expiring this Sunday, which is 26th of June, and then Russian state will be officially in default. In addition, there is another Russian corporate issuer of the debt called Alrosa. It's one of the largest miner of diamonds in the world. So they're gonna miss their payment, interest payment on their corporate bond this week, which will put them in default as well. So there could be a significant, as you can see, this avalanche of Russian corporate avalanche of defaults of Russian corporate issuers and Russian state will probably increase. It will increase over coming months, and this remains to be seen. How it's going to affect financial markets in the West. So let's see what's going on. We'll see what's going on Monday and Tuesday once the markets open, because there is a significant amount of debt on the hands of Western asset managers, and we mentioned, I think it was PIMCO, that owns a couple billions of Russian sovereign debt. So they will be directly affected by that, and it can send ripple effects through the market. So that's one topic. Then second is now Russian railroads are basically blocking stop transporting some of the goods to Poland. It wasn't disclosed which ones they're gonna stop transporting to Poland, and this is in response to the blockage by Lithuania that we discussed before, and that it was eased. Nevertheless, Russia decided to sort of react, do something about it. Then going back to oil, so the one interesting data point that we discussed many times, but we will continue mentioning this because the current policies are in the West are totally counterproductive and lead to actually, worse situation in the West. And obviously, Ukraine is part of it, so it's going to get affected too. But India is now buying 10% of Russian oil production. And as a reminder, Russia is producing right now about 10 million barrels per day. So India is buying 1 million. This was in May, statistics from the May, and it's quickly increasing its purchasing of Russian oil. So, and then China buys even more. So China probably buys at this point 2-3 million. So you can see that Russia is relatively quickly able to switch from, let's say, Europe and the West, all of that extra, and from the US, all of that extra oil goes to India and China and probably other countries in Asia. In other news, Russian hackers group called Killnet, which probably supervised by FSB, KGB. It's definitely not sort of random people, not random hackers for sure. So they start to actively attack infrastructure in the West and specifically in the US. So from based on what they report. So they attacked ExxonMobil, and they were successful in blocking ExxonMobil Rewards Plus cards. We don't know much about it. It's probably just some kind of consumer fuel cards that's being used in US. And then they also were successful attacking ERCOT Shell Energy, and ERCOT stands for some energy commission in Texas, basically. So they were able to basically some Shell customers who kind of the work on the umbrella. So the big umbrella is essentially this ERCOT, and then Shell is sort of supplying some of the consumers in Texas. So apparently, somehow they they managed to breach some of the systems within ERCOT Shell Energy. So as you can see, they pretty aggressively and actively starting to ramp up hacker attacks on the infrastructure in the West. Now let's actually discuss sort of more military, kind of like big picture of what's going on in general. So between Ukrainian army and the Russian army. So in a simple, kind of like a primitive, easy to understand way, you can say that the smaller Soviet army is fighting larger Soviet army, and obviously larger Soviet army is the Russian army, and smaller Soviet army is Ukrainian army. And so we just want to repeat this. We mentioned this before, and we want to repeat it again. Unless the smaller Soviet army, all else being equal, will not be able to sort of defend itself successfully against the larger Soviet army, right? Simply because there are more resources, right? And the larger Soviet army doesn't even need to change anything. It can remain Soviet army, and it just simply win because there are more resources from all kind of resources, right? There's and it's about about 3.5 times advantage, right? So that's a huge advantage in general. This is hard to overcome. So the only path for strategically for Ukrainian army to successfully defend the country is to actually reform and stop being Soviet army, smaller Soviet army. That's the only way out of this, because otherwise it's going to be slow bleeding and slow retreat, place by place. But eventually it will not end well, right? And even because there is this hope among the Ukrainian sort of political top that okay, West will provide some heavy weapons, and that will solve the problem. We don't need to change anything internally, so we can kind of keep the business the way it is, and everything's going to be okay because now we have this heavy weapons. So first of all, there is a big disappointment that actually these heavy weapons are not coming in the quantities that are necessary to sort of offset this sort of Soviet army disadvantage that Ukraine has, right? And they will never come simply because the West does not have that amount of resources to give to donate to Ukraine. So Ukraine needs, like the Ukrainian army specifically, and Ukraine probably as a society needs to modernize, change, and become more efficient. This is about efficiency. So the only path is efficiency, and Soviet system is anything but efficient. It's complete antithesis to efficiency, right? So, for example, we're gonna go back to so Ukraine received this HIMARS multiple rocket launching system, right, from US. There are already 4 in Ukraine. There are 4 more coming. So I think it would be 8, or maybe actually it was 8 came and then 4 more coming. So it would be 12. Then there are, I think 3 from Germany coming, and I think 3 or 4 from the UK, right? So almost 20 units, right? So that's, it's not huge, but if it's used right, plus, and so just, sorry, forgot to mention, a few more systems that have significant technical advantage over the equivalent Russian systems. This is this Panzerhaubitze 2000, PH-2000, and then the Polish Crabs, and then French Caesars, right? Those three items, and Ukraine at this point will have close to 50 of those. So this can create this equipment can create actually a significant advantage if it's, let's say, it's concentrated on a small stretch of front line over the Russian army. It basically the way it should be the way they should be used as a counter battery like fire, right? So they need to fight heavy Russian artillery, long range. So Russia is using 203 millimeter cannons, right? They use 152 millimeter cannons that we discussed, right? This self-propelled, and then they simply have just like as a regular wheeled cannons. So that needs to be knocked out in a sort of systematic, strategic way, and that's not what's being done by Ukrainian army. They sort of spread this units thin, and they just float around and shooting at random tanks, at random BMPs. That doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't. It's essentially to a great extent misuse of very valuable and very capable equipment. And then the second problem there is that there is still no equivalent of this Arlan 10, which is primitive but really excellent tool that Russian army has. And the more important, not that they have this tool, but it's organizationally structured very correctly. That's embedded within artillery unit, and nobody can touch it except for the artillery unit, right? So Ukraine still didn't develop, don't have those type of UAVs for this newly acquired potent weapons. And essentially, without those UAVs, those weapons, their potency is essentially not there, because you really need the long distance UAVs to correct the fire. No matter how, the way this works and is that let's say this Caesar or Crab or PH-2000, they shoot the shell, right? But it's, let's say, GPS like sort of let's say guided, right? But it's never precise, right? It falls within 5 meters, right? The radius, right? 5 meter, like you kind of create a circle with 5 meters, and the sort of problem is 5 meter is far enough not to destroy many valuable targets, right? So you really need to you need to have UAV that flies, and then you correct, okay, you hit it or not, and eventually you'll hit it with a second shot or something like that, right? So it's excellent weapon, but you still need to correct. It's not like, hey, you press the button and it hits and you forgot about it. You have guarantee. No, you don't have guarantee, right? So that's another problem, right? And so right now, let's say in Ukraine, it's reported as a big deal that actually in that there is a purchase of 10 UAVs that are worse equivalent than Arlan 10 for Ukrainian army. And the most interesting part, that it's not even purchased by Ukrainian government, but as we discussed many times, it's all supported by the population of Ukraine. So people in Ukraine, provide financial donations, and they're gathering. The goal is to gather, let's say, $8.5 million for essentially, basically, it's a system with 2 UAVs. So it's effectively 20 UAVs. So each will cost about $425,000. And we discussed this, that our land costs $100,000, right? And even then, when we said it's 100,000, there's a lot of sort of Russian corruption sort of part there. So real cost of the airplane plus the equipment is no more than about 30,000. That's the most. The rest is basically profit and some corruption kickbacks that's being paid to the Russian government officials so that they buy it. So this is how it's there is a tremendous amount of the problems in this way. And so this retreat from Severodonetsk, well, was right. Eventually, there is no stoppage to this, because that's what we say. There's no strategic response by Ukraine. There's no ability to strategically deal with the Russian approach to the to fighting, right? Which is in many ways primitive, but it works, right? You just shell the area with huge amount of artillery shells. You destroy everything, you turn it into moonlightscape, and you advance, right? So that's the strategy. It's a primitive strategy, but it does work for the Russian army. And unless Ukrainian army does not reform to become much more efficient, and so what this means is that it's able to use those weapons that were given in extremely efficient way, there is no way out of this corner in the long run for Ukraine. And that's why we discussed the situation of the World War One and the Russian Empire's army and the German army on the Eastern Front of the World War One. And when eventually German army broke the backbone of the Russian army by simply having better artillery, right? So they just were shelling Russian infantry, and eventually the morale broke, and the army broke, and that led to the revolution in the Russian Empire, and eventually civil war there, right? So this is how it all worked in the past, and we're just drawing these analogies to kind of explain that this is not just kind of like, hey, we're just talking about some abstract things. They will, if this is not corrected, this will replay in a similar way, as it was Mark Twain, I think, said that history does not repeat, but it rhymes, right? So that's why we discussed this. Now let's actually switch to our frontline walkthrough in a clockwise fashion, starting from the very north. Again, there is artillery shelling along the border. No news, no changes here. There were some attempts by Ukrainian side to attack some energy infrastructure in Bryansk region. We don't really even sort of perfectly follow it, because it's essentially mosquito bites that don't change much right now. So now let's move to the Kharkiv, to the Kharkiv area, and let's see what's going on there. Situation is the same. There is a little bit more Russian pressure now to push Ukrainian troops a little bit more towards Kharkiv to increase the buffer. There is apparently quite a bit of fighting going on for Rubizhne here. Russian sources report that they captured Rubizhne. Ukrainian sources sort of say that they still hold it. So it's unclear situation, but essentially what is clear is that Russian troops are really trying to execute on their plan. They stubbornly doing it. It takes them a long time, but they try to push Ukrainian troops from this area, from essential to keep Ukrainian troops away from Severodonetsk in this area, so they don't create any kind of risk for the Russian logistics on Izyum bridgehead. And then they're also trying to push in this area just to come closer to Kharkiv, which is just simply just for potential shelling, and essentially that's the goal there. Now let's move to Izyum bridgehead. Situation here is essentially the same. Again, continued Russian pressure towards this village Kransopillya and Dolyna. that are essentially just one big village. No news, no changes there. Some pressure in Bogorodychne. So just a little bit of more pressure along the typical areas as well. Here in Kurulka, so nothing new here. All sort of the same and more or less stable. So now let's actually look at Severodonetsk Salient, and let's actually discuss in detail what's going on here. So because there is probably some confusion in both propaganda machines trying to sort of obscure and kind of like make it unclear for the observers, for the viewers, what's really happening. So what happened is Ukrainian troops retreated from Severodonetsk bridgehead, right? Not last, but the majority of Ukrainian troops left the past night, right? The when we were sharing with you the previous update, right? So there are some potentially rear guard units or sort of like reconnaissance units that left in the area, but from the perspective of like regular large units, they all gone. They moved back to the western side of Siversky Donetsk River, right? So that's one thing. The other, let's actually look what happened from this whole area that used to be controlled by Ukrainian army, and let's actually look at how it started developing. So this was actually planned. Now, after fact, we can discuss it. It was planned withdrawal of Ukrainian army from this essentially kind of like semi-pocket that was started to building. Obviously, it was planned in terms of, it was executed properly. It was organized withdrawal. It didn't lead to losses, and Ukrainian army managed to establish new front line, which is what it is right now, right? This is the new front line. That's where it goes, right? However, the withdrawal started actually on June 21st. And that's why, if you remember, in that video, we discussed that the Russian troops reported that they did not encounter any kind of strong resistance from Ukrainian troops at all, right? When they were capturing this area, Myrna Dolyna, right? So that was the first sign that was planned withdrawal, and essentially over this, from 21st to 23rd, Ukrainian troops managed to get out from this pocket and establish the new front line. So there was no any big unit that was trapped in a pocket. That could have been that some rear guard, individual soldiers got, they were, got as prisoners of war, and that kind of stuff. But that's not anything mass scale or anything. It was not sort of true pocket as Russian propaganda tries to represent, right? So it was actually very surprisingly and very correctly executed, orderly, properly executed withdrawal from this pocket. Now let's actually go back a little bit to the situation. This is obviously not a positive sign. We're not trying to say, hey, this is great for you, Ukrainian army is great. No, it's not great. It was forced decision, right? But it was timely and correct decision in these circumstances, because otherwise there would be actually pocket there, right? There would be disaster. That's obviously, and as we discussed, it will affect morale of troop much worse than anything. That was the main problem. Was there not even there that let's say 500 soldiers will become prisoners of war, which is bad by itself, because the life of every person is important, but the much more worse effect would have been from this encirclement, right? Then that didn't happen, and that is what is great, right? So, but again, it's a result. This withdrawal is forced, right, and a sign of weakness and sign of Ukrainian army not able to to sort of deal with the Russian way of war, right? Because as we said, it's a smaller Soviet army fighting like larger Soviet army, and actually here, like when we say larger Soviet army, this actually does it's actually in a way misleading, and I forgot to mention this when at the beginning. So Russia is actually having fewer soldiers on the ground than Ukrainian army. Our estimate it's probably 150 160,000 soldiers, while Ukraine has at least 200 and potentially even more. So and then there's many more at another 500 in sort of call it reserve. They are conscripts. They are being pulled from their civilian life, and some of them are going through okay training, some of them having terrible training, some of them have excellent training. So it's not uniform, it's not systematic, it's just kind of like a draw of luck for many people, right? But what we're trying also when we say largest Soviet army about Russian army, it has fewer soldiers in Ukraine, right? In total, obviously, it's larger entity, but in Ukraine, when they achieve all of the squeezes, it's not by the overwhelming number of soldiers, it's by overwhelming amount of artillery specifically. And then obviously there is equipment, there are tanks, there's large number of those, but that is sort of secondary in many ways, right? The most important is this heavy use of artillery that basically creates moon landscape, and then you kind of go through the moon landscape, right? And plus there is a problem with Ukrainian troops that they are not trained specifically for this type of war, and in many ways the training is misguided in our opinion, right? Because they've been trained, was this how to shoot AK, but it's in many cases useless, right? In this war, it's more about how you dig in, how you manage to survive heavy artillery shelling while you're being dug in. So, and that's training is essentially not there, because there are some instances of things done right, but it's not sort of, we cannot say, hey, all Ukrainian army is there, and at least majority of it, it's actually small minority that's doing right things, and so so that's kind of like how when we say that it's going back to this big large Soviet army, is it's in terms of equipment, right? So, and potentially Russia eventually, if it needs, it will double down at this, and they will bring conscripts, right? Because the bridge is effectively burned at this point between the West and the Russia. And this is another thing that everybody should understand. It's not just some kind of regional war. It's essentially war between the West at large and obviously Ukraine, and then Russia, right? In this case, from Ukrainian perspective, it's it's defending its independence, it's defending its right for self-determination, right? Even if Ukraine makes sort of mistakes, and population in Ukraine makes mistakes by electing poor political leaders, that doesn't sort of change their right for self-determination too, because as you make mistakes, you learn from mistakes, right? So and that's what Ukraine, it's defending its right for self-determination, for its own way of life. But again, as we discussed, going back to this whole situation, that now there is heavy artillery shelling in all of this area, right? So and Ukraine, an army is not able to sort of create some strategic answer to this, right? So now we know that Russia is putting very heavy pressure on this Vovchoyarivka, right? This is now sort of new sort of Russian focus at this point. So essentially, they want to kind of continue going north and clear up this whole area, right? As we discussed. So now there will be it's basically very uncomfortable to be in this area between Bilohorivka, Berestove, and then Lysychansk, right? This whole area, because it's being subjected to heavy Russian artillery shelling, and so and the supply is difficult and everything. So our take is that Ukrainian army more likely than not will be forced to withdraw to some kind of line, as we discussed, probably from Bilohorivka to actually another Bilohorivka. So if you, just for those, just because it's very confusing, there are many sort of similar or the same names in Ukraine actually. So if you see, there is Bilohorivka here, where there was that Russian bridgehead attempt, and then there is Bilohorivka here as well. So they're exactly the same, two exactly same names. But basically, we think that the Ukrainian army will be forced to withdraw to this line just because of the heavy amount of shelling that's been going on here. And this is just a question of time again. And then once they withdraw to this, the next will be, as we discussed, this valley that goes through this. You see, like from Bakhmut through these villages and go to the river essentially. And then there is another sort of like sort of hill, like row of hills here. So that's kind of next defensive line. But that's effectively what's sort of the future holds for this whole situation here at this point, right? Um, Now let's actually, after spending so much time on discussing the strategic stuff, let's continue go south. This is the new front line, and just sorry, before we kind of go, just want to explain here. This is new front line more or less, and then and when Russian sort of sources say that they already attacking Severodonetsk, so essentially they are on outskirts of Severodonetsk, because this is some small village that's essentially outskirt of sorry, not Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, I apologize. So this is Lysychansk, right? So this is the sort of main body of the town, and this is like outskirts of it, right? So that's what you see here. That's no, so technically you can claim we're already attacking Lysychansk, but and it is outskirts of Lysychansk. But the main actually focus is not towards Lysychansk, because fighting, urban fighting, is always bad, and it's very difficult for Russian army, given that they don't have enough soldiers, right? Because urban fighting requires a lot of soldiers. To basically to capture any town or large city, you need a lot of soldiers. That's actually why Russian army failed to capture Kiev, right? It simply was not enough troops at their disposal then, and there was enough of resistance from Ukrainian side, so that that made it impossible for Russian troops to actually capture Kiev. So what they do, they actually the typical approach is not to try to attack these cities or towns. They go through the kind of like rural areas, let's put this way. So that's why they putting this focus, and they trying to capture now this Vovchoyarivka, and then the next step would be capturing this Lysychansk oil refinery. We mentioned about this. It's being idle for some time because of the poor management, but this is where they kind of going. This is now new direction of attack for the Russian troops here in this area. This is yeah, we just going back to this old from 21st, this map. Let's now look what's going on in the southern section of the Popasna salient. Situation here is stable. There were new attempts by the Wagner mercenaries to create a pocket for Ukrainian troops in this area, but they were not successful, as we discussed. There is battalion here that's pretty well trained, very motivated, with high quality soldiers here that was attached to the 30th brigade, so it's being able to hold area here so far. Okay, now this is just closer look in this area. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on west of Donetsk. And it's more or less sort of stable artillery shelling. The only difference, there was a small-scale attack towards Mariinka, and for those who are regular viewers, you remember this is just some kind of like a magical sort of actually it's a village, so it's a magical village, and it always attracts Russian attacks for whatever reason. We don't really it's unclear to us actually why. And then Avdiivka, but Avdiivka didn't sort of experience those attacks today, only Mariinka. Then let's look at the Zaporizhia front line, and this is the whole stretch of it. Again, everything's here on freeze, on hold, just artillery shelling, reconnaissance groups fighting, small skirmishes, but nothing really major here on both sides. Now let's move to the Kherson bridgehead here, and the situation is the same as on the Zaporizhia front line, similar to what's going on east of Kharkiv, similar to what's going on west of Donetsk. So it's all kind of more or less the same. Okay, thanks for watching today, and until tomorrow, bye bye.